For centuries, Sparta was the embodiment of invincibility. Its warriors, trained from childhood, seemed indestructible, and their phalanx was an impenetrable wall capable of withstanding any onslaught. It was believed that only overwhelming numerical superiority or betrayal could break this ideal. But history, as we know, loves to throw up surprises. And in 371 BC, near the small Boeotian village of Leuctra, the world witnessed the collapse of this myth under the onslaught of unprecedented tactics and unyielding will. On the battlefield at Leuctra, in the air thick with anticipation of the coming battle, the familiar confidence of the Spartans hung heavy. Their king, Cleombrotus I, placed his elite troops on the right flank, following the long-standing tradition that the right flank was always the strongest and delivered the decisive blow. It was believed that this concentration of the best warriors would ensure a quick breakthrough and victory. But the Theban commander Epaminondas saw the battlefield differently. His gaze, penetrating and full of bold ideas, saw not just the disposition of troops, but the vulnerabilities hidden behind centuries-old habits. Epaminondas was not just a military leader, he was an architect of military thought, capable of overturning established ideas about war. He understood that a head-on collision according to Spartan rules would only bring bloodshed and would not guarantee success. His response was revolutionary, the oblique phalanx. Instead of distributing his forces evenly across the entire line, he concentrated his power on the left wing, creating a striking fist there with a depth of 50 rows. The center and right flank of the Theban army were deliberately weakened so that the Spartans could not outflank them while the main attack was directed at their strongest part. This maneuver, documented for the first time in history, was not just a tactical ploy, but a fundamental change in the art of warfare. It allowed even the most impenetrable Spartan line to be broken by delivering a concentrated blow to the very heart of the enemy formation. While the main forces of the phalanx converged, Epaminondas had another surprise in store. The Theban cavalry, more numerous and better trained than the Spartan cavalry, moved forward. Even before the hoplites engaged in hand-to-hand combat, the Theban horsemen routed the weak Spartan cavalry. This early success caused confusion and chaos in the Spartan ranks, depriving them of their flank protection and further weakening their position before the main clash. At the forefront of this unprecedented attack, in the front ranks of the oblique phalanx, marched the Sacred Band. These were not just warriors, they were a unique military unit consisting of 300 select hoplites divided into 150 pairs of warriors. Imagine the power of connection when each warrior fights not only for himself, for his homeland, but also for the one standing next to him, for his partner. This mutual devotion, stronger than steel, guaranteed unprecedented bravery and steadfastness. As Plutarch wrote, this squad, fully funded by the state, dedicated its life to the art of war. Their training was continuous, their discipline impeccable, and their motivation almost religious. For them, shame in front of a comrade, let alone a partner, was worse than death. It was this feeling that prevented them from retreating, even when all seemed lost. They were each other's shield and sword. On the day when the oblique phalanx moved forward, they were the first to crash into the elite ranks of the Spartans. It was a clash of titans, the invincible Spartan discipline against the unprecedented Theban innovation, and deeply personal, unbreakable loyalty. The Sacred Band, like a sharp wedge, broke through the dense ranks of the Spartans, advancing purposefully towards the place where King Cleombrotus I stood. Their onslaught was so powerful and focused that they became the key element of victory, breaking through what was considered impregnable. When the armies clashed, the Spartans, accustomed to numerical superiority and confident in their invincibility, had between 10 and 11,000 hoplites under their banner. The Thebans were significantly fewer in number, with only 6,500 to 7,000 warriors. Everything pointed to another Spartan victory, but the battle turned into a complete and shameful defeat. This oblique phalanx did not simply change the formation, it changed the very pace and character of the battle. The left wing of the Thebans, where the main force was concentrated, moved forward at an accelerated pace, while the center and right flank deliberately held back, creating the effect of a growing wave that crashed down on a single point. The Spartans, accustomed to uniform pressure across the entire line, were completely unprepared for such an asymmetrical strike. Their well-oiled war machine could not quickly regroup when the blow fell where it was not expected. The sacred band, like the tip of this wedge, did not simply fight, it destroyed the myth of Spartan invincibility with every strike of its spear. Their presence, their willingness to sacrifice themselves for their comrades, struck terror into the hearts of their enemies. This was not just a military unit, it was a living symbol of a new era, where personal connection and innovative tactics could surpass centuries-old traditions and even numerical superiority. Each warrior of the sacred band became the embodiment of this new, more flexible and motivated military force. On the field where order and discipline had reigned until recently, chaos now reigned. Through the dust and clang of metal, a terrible rumor spread. King Cleombrothus I had fallen. This was not just the death of a military leader, it was the symbolic collapse of Spartan invulnerability, a blow to the very heart of their self-awareness. For the first time in many decades, a Spartan king had died in battle fighting the Greeks. But the king's death was only the tip of the iceberg. Even more terrible were the losses among the Spartiates, the full citizens of Sparta who formed the basis of their military power and social structure. Of the 700 Spartans who took part in the battle, about 400 died on the field of Leuctra. These were irreplaceable losses, equivalent to the loss of an entire generation of the most valuable members of society. The total losses of the Spartan army amounted to 1,000 men, which was a colossal figure for them. By comparison, the Thebans, thanks to their innovative tactics and focused attack, lost less than 50 soldiers. These irreplaceable losses, especially among the Spartans, undermined the very foundation of Spartan society, which was already suffering from a demographic crisis. The loss of so many citizens, whose upbringing and training had taken years, was a blow from which Sparta would never fully recover. On that day, at Leuctra, they did not just lose a battle, they lost their future. The Spartan system was cruel and uncompromising, carved out of ancient traditions and an unshakable belief in the superiority of military honor. Its civil society was based on the concepts of valor, discipline, and, above all, an absolute willingness to die for Sparta without hesitation. For a Spartan, the very thought of fleeing the battlefield, of showing even the slightest weakness, was more terrifying than death itself. A warrior who dared to violate this unwritten but deeply rooted law was subjected not only to condemnation, but to complete and merciless ostracism. Such people, branded with eternal shame, were called trescents, which literally meant trembling ones. It was not just a word, it was a mark burned into the very soul of a person, a mark that could not be washed away by anything, not even years of service or future exploits. The life of a tresanter became a living hell, an endless series of humiliations. He lost all the civil rights that were so dear to every Spartan. He was forbidden to hold public office. His voice carried no weight at public meetings, and he was denied the right to vote. He was shunned even in the market square, as if he were a leper. No one had the right to greet him, and in public places he had to give way even to those younger than himself. He could be publicly ridiculed, even children could laugh at him, and no one, not a single Spartan, had the right to defend him. He was not allowed to shave his beard, a symbol of masculinity and maturity, and his clothes had to be dirty and torn, emphasizing his low status. Even in sacred athletic competitions, where the Spartans demonstrated their physical power and perfection, the tresant was excluded from participation. He was not allowed to marry, and if he already had a family, his children bore this unbearable shame. Sparta, like no other state, knew the price of shame, and it was exorbitantly high, often exceeding the value of life itself. But after the Battle of Leuctra, the situation changed dramatically, taking on a truly grotesque character. Not just a few, not dozens, but hundreds of Spartans fled the battlefield, and according to the strict letter of the law, they should have been declared deserters. There were too many of them to simply apply the ancient law without destroying the state itself. If Sparta had declared all these survivors, these fugitives, to be deserters, it would have effectively deprived a significant part of its already catastrophically shrinking community of Spartiates, full citizens who formed the backbone of their army and society, of their civil rights. This would have been suicidal, a split that would inevitably have led to civil war, to internal conflict that would have torn Sparta apart from within. A society already shaken by the loss of the 400 best warriors, the flower of the nation, would not have been able to withstand such pressure. At a time when the external enemy, Thebes, was celebrating its unprecedented victory, Sparta had to find a way to preserve itself without destroying its own foundations, without tearing itself apart with its own hands. The choice was between preserving the law and preserving the state. Faced with this seemingly unsolvable dilemma, King Agesilaus, one of the most influential and respected Spartan leaders of the time, found himself in a hopeless situation. His authority, his experience, his wisdom were at stake. He understood that literal, blind adherence to the law would lead to the inevitable destruction of Sparta. It was then, at one of the darkest moments in Spartan history, as noted by many ancient historians, including Xenophon, that he uttered the phrase that went down in history, becoming a symbol of a forced departure from principles. "Let the laws sleep today." This was not just a decision, not just a decree. It was a desperate acknowledgement of the depth of the catastrophe, an unprecedented act of pragmatism that ran counter to everything Sparta had preached for centuries, to its entire ideology, to every word carved in stone in its foundations. For the first time in its centuries-long history, Sparta was forced to compromise its sacred principles, its Lycurgus legislation, for the sake of survival, for the sake of not disappearing from the face of the earth. This act of repealing the law, albeit temporarily, was the clearest acknowledgement not only of military defeat, but also of the profound moral collapse that had befallen the invincible. Their myth of infallibility, of perfection, of invulnerability was shattered to pieces like a fragile vessel. It was an admission that even Sparta, a symbol of indestructibility, could break under the pressure of reality. The defeat at Leuctra was not just a lost battle, not just a painful blow to pride. It was the first blow that brought down centuries of Spartan hegemony and opened the door to unprecedented events that changed the map of Greece. Whereas Sparta had previously been the one dictating terms, invading and conquering, imposing its will on other city-states, it now found itself in the position of victim, its land invaded and its foundations targeted for destruction. Epaminondas, the Theban commander who had already proven his genius on the battlefield, did not rest on his laurels. His strategic genius extended far beyond tactical schemes. He understood that the victory at Leuctra was only the beginning, the first but decisive step. To finally break Sparta, it was necessary to strike at its very heart, at what was considered impregnable and unshakable, at Laconia itself. In 370 BC, just 1 year after Leuctra, Epaminondas led the combined army of the Boeotian League and their allies deep into the Peloponnese, straight into Spartan territory. It was an event that no one had seen in centuries, something completely unbelievable for his contemporaries. For several hundred years, since the Dorian invasion,
No one, no external force had dared to set foot on the sacred land of Laconia with hostile intentions. Neither the powerful Persians, nor the ambitious Athenians, nor other Greek city-states. No one had even attempted to besiege Sparta itself. Its reputation, its military might, its legendary discipline were such an invisible but impenetrable shield that the very appearance of an enemy at its walls seemed impossible, absurd, contrary to the laws of nature. But Epaminondas did it. He did not simply invade. He marched through unprotected lands, reached the walls of Sparta, and laid siege to it.
It was not just a military maneuver. It was a profound psychological humiliation, a blow to the very root of Spartan self-awareness. For the Spartans, whose land had never seen enemy fire, whose homes had always been safe behind the walls of their own reputation, it was a shock. It was the end of their illusion of invulnerability. But the most devastating blow that Epaminondas dealt to Sparta was not military, but socio-economic, a blow that slowly but surely undermined it from within. He freed the Helots of Messenia. The Helots were not simply slaves in the usual sense of the word. They were subjugated inhabitants who were in the unique position of being state slaves attached to the land. Their labor, sweat, and blood were the foundation of the Spartan economy. They worked the land, grew crops, and fed the Spartans, who, in turn, could devote themselves entirely to the harsh military life and continuous training without being distracted by economic concerns. Without the Helots, the Spartan system, its unique way of life, and its social structure could not have existed. The liberation of the Helots of Messenia, an ancient and fertile region that Sparta had held under its rule for several centuries, was tantamount to ripping the heart out of Sparta's chest. It was not simply an act of mercy or justice. It was a strategic, truly ingenious move that deprived Sparta of its resource base, its economic foundation, its vital source of food and labor. The Helots gained their freedom, and with it, land and the opportunity to build their own lives and their own community. For Sparta, this meant not only the irretrievable loss of labor, but also the loss of control over vast territories that had nourished its power for centuries and allowed it to maintain its military ideal. The free Helots of Messenia, once oppressed and deprived of all rights, now, with the support of Thebes, began to build their own city, Messene, with powerful walls and majestic temples. This city became not just a new settlement, it became a symbol of their rebirth and final irrevocable separation from Spartan rule. It was a living monument to Sparta's defeat, a constant reminder of its losses. At the same time, Thebes, under the wise and decisive leadership of Epaminondas, rose as a new hegemon, the dominant power in Greece. Its influence spread far beyond Boeotia. Its military innovations were copied and studied by other city-states, and its commander became a living legend, eclipsing even the most famous Spartan generals. And the Spartans? They lost not only their best warriors on the field of Leuctra, not only their Helots and the fertile lands of Messenia, but also their most important asset, their most powerful defense, the myth of invincibility. This myth, which for centuries had instilled paralyzing fear in the hearts of their enemies and indomitable pride in the souls of the Spartans themselves, was shattered to dust at Leuctra and finally buried beneath the walls of besieged Sparta and liberated Messenia. They began to sincerely and truly fear Theban power because, for the first time, they faced an enemy who not only defeated them in open battle, but also dared to encroach on their sacred land and destroy their economic foundation. This fear, this awareness of their vulnerability, accelerated their decline, which lasted for decades. The humiliating defeat at the hands of Thebes permanently undermined Spartan power, turning fear into reality. Sparta, once powerful and awe-inspiring, became a shadow of its former self, Its population continued to decline dramatically. Its system failed, and it was never able to regain its former dominant position in the Greek world.